So we think about Clay as sort of finding, closing, and growing your best customers. And I would say for each of the verbs in that sentence, we have agents for those.
Welcome, everyone. My name is Harrison, co-founder and CEO of LangChain, joined here by Jeff Barg at Clay. Jeff, do you want to introduce yourself briefly?
Yeah, well, thanks so much, Harrison. I'm Jeff. I lead our AI team at Clay, and I'm really excited to chat.
All right. So most people probably have some idea of what Clay is, but for those that don't, do you maybe want to give an introduction of what Clay does and maybe how they're using AI throughout it?
So Clay, we think of ourselves as the creative tool for growth. And really what that means is building any kind of growth idea in Clay. And what that kind of looks like in practice is building lists of companies and people, enriching them with data points, either through traditional enrichment providers or using AI for web research or data synthesis, et cetera, and then activating on those lists of companies and people, either for outbound campaigns or lead enrichment, lead routing, things like that.
So you guys were around well before AI came out. You're one of the first, I think, to embrace it. Do you maybe want to talk about why you embraced it and how early you embraced it and what that process kind of like looked like from the early days up until where it is now?
I think we started as effectively a chat completions wrapper, right? So people would use AI for summarizing long documents or writing outbound copy. And I think one of the things that we observed early on was people were actually using web research, so pulling down, scraping web pages, and then deterministically kind of using AI to summarize or kind of extract insights from those web pages. And so I'd say that we were quite early in actually launching Claygent, which is our AI web research agent.
And when did that launch?
It might have been like mid 2023.
Okay.
Yeah.
So like right after ChatGPT kind of.
Yeah. So pretty early days in the kind of the GPT-4 era. And yeah, I think what was interesting about that was it was really a user behavior that we observed. So people actually kind of trying to wrap that into something that would actually do it autonomously or agentically.
And so nowadays, if someone uses Clay, like how many different touch points are there with AI?
So we think about Clay as sort of finding, closing, and growing your best customers. And I would say for each of the verbs in that sentence, we have agents for those. So we have an agentic search product to actually do TAM sourcing and find your best customers, to actually search through the web or search through our database of companies and people to find your best accounts. Grow those accounts, so doing research or actually figuring out whether a company meets your ICP with reasoning and sort of doing that agentically, and then actually engaging with and closing those accounts. So either through a native sequencer or actually sending outbound messaging.
And what is the scale that you guys are operating agents at?
So I think what's super interesting, I think, about AI within our product is it's grown, of course, because the business has grown, but it's also grown more as a percentage of our overall actions over time. And today we're running around 300 million agent runs a month.
Okay.
So, yeah, quite large scale.
And what is an agent run? Like how many steps does it take? How long does it run for? I'm sure it varies to some extent, but like what stats do you have there?
Yeah, it's grown over time as well. I think this is partly because of the underlying models, but also because of our architecture. Somewhere between, I would say, 10 to 30 steps, usually on average, doing sort of a mix of, synthesizing web documents, actually searching the web, crawling different pages, things like that.
As you guys started building more and more of these agents and, Clay turned from purely kind of like a software app into this software plus agent app, like how did your development process change for building those agents?
We think about three things at Clay, right? So we think about the quality of the agent runs. So actually people care a lot about getting correct data, and there's all sorts of idiosyncrasies about how people think about quality. But we think about quality, we think about throughput. So how many of these can we run in an efficient way? And we care about cost. And so I think we've used tools like LangSmith to really do offline evaluations of where we are in quality and benchmark those against kind of where we are in a cost throughput position.
How do you measure quality for these runs?
We have a mix of different methods. Some of the evals that we have are just purely factual, right? So just is the agent actually able to get the right answer, and compare those against ground truth.
And is that like a programmatic match? Or I imagine if you're doing research, you're kind of like compiling like a paragraph at least of like an answer. So do you use some like LLM-as-a-judge to score that, or what does that look like?
We do, yes. So some of these are just, we look for deterministic matches and we kind of structure outputs and sort of do it that way. And for some of these, we do use LLM-as-a-judge. I'd say a lot of our Clay customers will also use these agents for combining both research and then actually synthesizing that research into a recommendation, whether that's qualification or outbound messaging. But they're sort of doing, it's a multi-purpose sort of agent.
When a new model comes out, and it seems like there's a new model coming out every week or something like that, what does your process look like to see if it's better or we'll talk about costs later on, but like what does your process look like to see if it's a good fit for your type of workflows?
I think Clay's position really is we're model agnostic in some ways. So we do allow users to select their preference of model provider, and I think we're not really yet at the point where models are completely interchangeable, or
Mhm.
they do have different sort of writing styles, profiles of the actual work that they can do, and I think users have come to learn that over time, right? So we have users that really prefer Anthropic models and users that really prefer OpenAI models for different things. Um, I think our job is really sort of giving the right recommendations to users. And so for us, we have a metaprompter tool that basically automatically maps prompts to different models based on the profile that we think is best for that underlying question.
So when a new model comes out, do you add like a new mapping to that metaprompter tool? Is that what it looks like to support it?
Exactly. Yeah. And I think we use kind of evals to understand where we should be mapping those things and for what use cases those models are best for.
You've mentioned LangSmith a few times. How does that fit throughout the whole kind of like agent development process for you guys?
For us, LangSmith is we really think about it in two ways. One is just profiling production traffic and understanding the patterns there, understanding if they're very different from what we expected or very widely across customers, things like that. And I think that LangSmith really helps us at our scale, where it's impossible for us to know for every customer exactly what's going on.
And when you say patterns, like is this like usage patterns or cost patterns or errors, latency, or all of the above?
All of the above, yeah. And I think something that's really important for us is being able to go to a customer level and understand what's happening. We get a lot of feedback from customers, and it's really hard to know what's just happening on the ground. And LangSmith really helps with just like knowing sort of, hey, customer reports this, but here's what actually happened. I would even add to that list just sort of underlying quality, right? If someone if someone says there's a problem with the actual answers that our agents are outputting, being able to understand, like, was that a tool problem? Was that an inference problem? Just kind of where in the stack that actually kind of fell down.
I think probably most people listening maybe have some sense of this, but maybe to like go into it, like why can't you just know that like before you go to production? Like,
There's a lot of things that can go wrong in production. And I think definitely on the quality side, I think the range of things that people are using agents for is just super broad.
and the input to them, is it just pure natural language for you guys?
It is, yeah. I think in most of the agents that we build, that there might be some structuring of what we end up passing to the agent, but it's usually a blank text box, and people can put anything in a blank text box.
You were talking about kind of like production insights being one part of how you use LangSmith, and the second part is
The second part is 0 to 1 agent building. So anytime we're building a lot of different agents across the go-to-market stack now. So things like agentic search, things like account agents that are able to reason about different accounts in your CRM. And for all of these new agents, we really need to understand kind of when you're building them, what's happening, just to get a kind of visualization of what those traces are and like uh, what the outputs look like. And I think without that, it's really hard to understand what's happening, right? Because like you just see the kind of what you expose to the end user, which isn't the entire agent trace.
so how early on in the development process do you turn on tracing?
It's day zero. Yeah. So we're it's almost always one of the first things that we do. And I think being able to stream in kind of traces, and actually it's part of the iteration process. It's just actually looking at the LangSmith traces.
We ended up working together on LangSmith for this. Why use LangSmith as opposed to build it in-house or any other alternatives out there?
I think LangSmith feels like a platform that was built by people who have built an agent framework.
Hmm.
And I think that really shines through. So we really liked kind of the ability to get sort of quick stats or be able to see traces in a way that is able to kind of understand the nesting of different subagents or different LLM paths as part of tool calls. And so there's all these sorts of small idiosyncrasies that really shine through in LangSmith.
And so you mentioned building your own agent harness from kind of like scratch. What did the process look like for connecting that to LangSmith?
Yeah, so we built on top of the Vercel AI SDK, and it was quite easy, right? So it was actually, I think, more or less a one-line change to get traces exported to LangSmith. That's why it makes it so easy to start on day zero. It's quite a simple integration.
Awesome. Any features of LangSmith that ended up being particularly critical, either like that you thought ahead of time as you were evaluating, or in the year or so since you've started using?
Yeah, we care a lot about cost observability, and so I think that that always was a key piece of what we were looking for. Um, I think the UI UX was actually like a pretty important part to us. Just being able to understand traces really quickly. We have a lot of engineers now working on different AI products in the company, and so being able to onboard them quickly and effectively to the platform was an important piece. I'd say the last piece is sort of being able to actually export traces to Snowflake and just be able to kind of do a lot of different analysis on these traces over time. And I'll give one more. I think also just kind of speed and performance of the platform was really crucial at our scale. And so just being able to get traces in quickly, the reliability of ingest, all of those kind of features.
Out of curiosity, how many people at Clay have access to LangSmith?
I'd say it's probably on the order of 25 to 50.
And is it mostly engineering, or are there people from other teams as well?
It's still mostly engineering. I think we do have folks who are not typically working in the AI features that do have access to LangSmith. I'd say some folks on our customer support team have started to use LangSmith for debugging customer traces,
Hmm.
and that's pretty cool. I think that was part of our initial evaluation, was actually wanting to onboard more of the team over time to LangSmith.
If you think about kind of like quantifying the impact that LangSmith has had, how how would you do that? Are there any like hard metrics you can point to? Are there any, yeah, how would you do it?
The one metric that we uh, we really cared about was actually just cost reconciliation, and we were in a pretty, I wouldn't say bad spot before LangSmith, but we really didn't have a good sense of where we were spending money on different inference providers. With LangSmith, and we now have, I think it's around like a 99, maybe like 99.5% reconciliation rate between the LangSmith data and our actual bills that we get from inference providers. So it's pretty much 100% of coverage of where we're actually spending money. Um, our finance team loves us for that, so I think that's always helpful. Um, yeah, I think like there are a bunch of intangibles of LangSmith as well. I think the development time, some of the tracing, and just sort of more traditional observability features they're very helpful for us. I think it's downtime erodes customer trust is bad.
You guys, I think, are at the forefront of building a lot of agents, and we've seen the types of agents that are in production change over the past, year, 6 months, even last 3 months. As agents become more and more viable and more agentic, are there any features in LangSmith that have become more important when moving to that agentic world? And another selfish question: are there features that we should build that you think will be even more important in that kind of like future?
One thing we're seeing more and more of, and probably not surprising, but is longer running agents. So agents that are taking many more steps and potentially running for longer periods of time. So we're seeing these longer running and longer horizon agents. I think one of the things that's helpful in LangSmith is just being able to kind of thread those over time. So the threads feature is quite helpful. I think just being able to uh, again, like understand the underlying ground truth of what's happening in those agents is quite helpful. One other piece that I think we're seeing more of, and we're experimenting with more, is subagents. Yeah, I think a feature in LangSmith that is quite helpful is just being able to actually see all of these agent traces kind of together in one place.
One of the things we're seeing is that, coding agents are doing more and more work and helping build some of these agents. One of the things we're thinking about is basically giving more of a way to kind of like pull down traces and give those to coding agents so they can see what went wrong in production or in a run and then fix themselves. Have you experimented with any of these like self-healing-ish workflow type things?
We're starting to do more of just background agents. So inspired by the folks at Ramp, just sort of trying to build kind of more coding agents as part of our SDLC. We haven't yet done kind of close the loop with LangSmith traces or actually production traces on that front, but I think that's a great idea.
Aside from kind of like pushing what agents look like, I think one of the things that is unique about you guys is the scale at which you operate. What advice would you have for others who, might not be at that scale now, but will hopefully get there in the next few months or year or so?
So yeah, I think one of the things that really helps when you're scaled out, or you have agents that are at scale, is just being able to understand the different types of questions and different types of behaviors that your agents are exhibiting. And I think it's really easy to do that when you're at a small scale, or you're rolling out a 0 to 1 product. But as soon as you go into hundreds of thousands or millions of agent runs, you can't actually understand the ground truth, or you can't actually understand what everyone is doing with agents at all times. I think we've played around with sort of the insights product with LangSmith and trying to understand just what are the patterns of different user behavior and different things that agents are doing. I think the other thing that's pretty helpful here is actually being able to have online evaluators for understanding what behavior of agents is happening at scale. And so, you might be able to get away with it without having this when you're in more of a 0 to 1 phase and just building out sort of your initial product. But certainly at Clay scale, those things are super helpful.
Because in the 0 to 1 phase, you can look at everything manually, but you just can't do that at scale.
Exactly. Yeah. Or you can just talk to every customer and kind of like, it's at some point that breaks down.
As agents get more complex, one of the things that we've heard people talking about is memory and how that ties into guiding them over longer and longer time horizons. Have you guys experimented with that at all, or have any takes there?
We're definitely seeing agents that are running over longer time horizons and, potentially are running around the same task for, several iterations over time. We haven't really seen a ton of examples of where the memory tools today actually benefit those use cases. So I think there's a lot of talk about continual learning or actually, having agents improve over time if they're doing the same task. And I think a lot of that hasn't borne out yet, right? So like a lot of the memory tools of today haven't really hit product market fit.
Are there techniques that maybe aren't in the memory tools of today that you have found to be useful?
We've experimented with file systems and just sort of being able to have agents write to write only logs, append only logs over time. That's interesting, and I think we're pretty excited about seeing where that goes. I'd say it's still pretty early. Yeah.
One of the interesting things that we think about is, the traces in LangSmith obviously have all that record of kind of like what happened and the feedback associated there. And so we haven't done anything with this aside from kind of like examples, but that can serve as a very interesting kind of like, system of record to inform some of the memory updates.
Like I think the skills paradigm is quite interesting, and I think being able to go from a lot of traces into kind of skills to improve those over time feels like maybe the right pattern here.
All right. Well, thank you, Jeff, for joining me. Really excited to have you here, and I've enjoyed working with you on everything around LangSmith. And thank you for sharing all your wisdom with everyone who's watching.
Wow, I appreciate it, Harrison, and thanks so much. Appreciate the partnership.